a professional German to English translator. I work a lot with the Old German script, so letters, diaries, baptismal certificates, marriage certificates. I've even done vaccination records from the 1800s. The furthest back I've gone is an obituary from the early 1600s. So it's a lot of interesting information. And if any of you have met Germans, you'll know that they are a very direct people. I can attest to that, having a German-speaking husband. That often comes forward in the letters that you'll see from Germany. I translated one letter from 1868, I believe, where a German lady was writing her sister, who had emigrated to America, and she wrote, "Dear sister, thank you so much for sending us the photographs of yourselves. But it's a good thing you wrote on the back who was who, because you've both gotten so old and fat that we wouldn't have recognized you." So German genealogy can be fun as well. But before I get into the presentation, I wanted to get to know you all a little bit. How many of you are actively researching your German ancestors? Great, so almost everyone. Is there anyone here who speaks German or knows a little bit of German? Okay, so a few people, great. A little bit. So I'll use this. We're gonna have a little history quiz. So when you're doing German genealogy, it's very important to know the history of Germany. And this helps you to place your ancestors and kind of know the situation in which they were living. It can help you to find their town and just to get a better idea of your ancestors' way of life. So, does anyone know what happened in 1517? I'll give you a hint, it has to do with religion. There you go, good job. Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. This was very important for genealogy because it was after the Protestant Reformation that church records began to be kept. They wanted to know who was Catholic, who was Protestant, and this is when the church records started being kept in villages. If you're lucky, you may find some from the 1400s. Has anyone ever gone back that far? Okay, but in general, it's the 1500s where you find church records. 1618 to 1648. Do we have any historians in the group? Very good. You guys are very impressive. The 30 Years' War. So that was a war between Catholics and Protestants. It eventually turned into something even bigger than that. But this is important for genealogy because many of the records were destroyed during this time. So in German genealogy, it's very difficult to find records before the 30 Years' War. Like I said, there were the church records that started in the 1500s, but many of them were lost. 1803 to 1815, any ideas? Very good. Napoleonic Wars. This is important for genealogy because Napoleon invaded parts of the German-speaking lands, and he brought with him the French record-keeping system. So that means that civil records began to be kept in Napoleon's conquered territories before they were kept in the rest of the German-speaking area. 1848? Yeah, very good. Exactly. 1848 was a very rough year for many countries in Europe. There were many revolutions. The people wanted a constitution. They wanted a more liberal government, but they all failed. So nothing really changed in 1848 except that they tried to get a constitution and failed. 1871, probably the most important year in German history. Any ideas? Unification. So before 1871, they were separate German kingdoms or states, and it was 1871 when Otto von Bismarck really pushed for this unification, uniting Prussia and the northern German states with the southern German states. And then now we're getting pretty easy, I hope. 1914 through 1918 is? There you go. And the last one, 39 through 45 is? Yes, World War II. So congratulations, you have all passed the history test. Here you can see what Germany looked like. The green is Prussia in 1866. Does anyone have ancestors from Prussia? Right, a lot. I mean, you can see how big Prussia is. A lot of our German ancestors come from this area. And the yellow is what was added to the German Empire in 1871. So you can see over here, this is no longer part of Germany today. This is part of Poland. Does anyone have ancestors over here in Poland? Okay, so you know this is a little bit harder because now these names are Polish. They are no longer German. And to find your ancestors here, you would have to go to the more Polish-speaking archives rather than the German. Same with over here, Alsace-Lorraine. Do we have anybody? Oh, a lot of people. So this area now belongs to France. So your German ancestors might have come from Germany, but it's no longer Germany today. So it's important to be aware of how the territories changed. So our German ancestors really practiced chain migration, and that means that they came over in waves. The first wave was the colonial era, 1600s to the 1700s. Did anyone have ancestors that came over from that early? Great. Any ideas for why they might have come over so early? Farmers, that'll come later. Yeah, there might have been some in the 1700s, but one main reason was famine. There was a big famine in 1709, so that led a lot of people to leave Germany. Religious persecution was probably one of the main reasons. I see a lot of you nodding. You might have heard that already. There were Protestants and Catholics in Germany, but there were also other people such as the Anabaptists, the Moravians. In Salzburg, the Lutherans were persecuted. So all of these groups who couldn't practice their religion freely in their homeland left and came for America. Taxing. Taxes were very heavy at this time, so they wanted to practice a little tax evasion and go to America. And then primogeniture. This means that the firstborn son was the only person who inherited or who got the farm. So you can see, these are a picture of my ancestors. All the pictures on this presentation are my ancestors. This is Fritz, and this is his wife Barbara. And they actually came over a little bit later, but Barbara came over with her brother because he was a second son and he wouldn't have inherited anything. So the second son and Barbara left for America to find better opportunities. So 1830 to 1890, yeah. I am actually not sure. We'll have to look that up afterwards. Does anyone know when primogeniture ended in Germany? Okay, it's a good question for later. 1830 to 1890 is the biggest immigration wave in German history. This happened because of the 1848 uprising. So after they failed, many people left Germany to go to America. The Industrial Revolution was a very, very big factor. As you said, a lot of people in Germany were farmers. And when the Industrial Revolution happened, all these farmers began to be replaced with machines. So they were facing economic hardship at home and heard that in America there was vast amounts of farmland to be farmed. So many people went to America during the Industrial Revolution. And then finally, opportunity. As we all know, America is the land of opportunity. And when the businessmen and other farmers saw these first farmers' success, they all thought, hey, maybe America is for me too. And then finally, World War I and World War II was religious and political immigrants. So how many people have immigrants that came over in the 1830 to 1890 period? I know I do. Right, as you can see, that's the most common. I think in the 1880s alone, 1.5 million Germans came to America. So now is the question, how do I find my ancestors? I am very, very spoiled in that my relatives in Germany created this big green book, as we call it, for our family. It's a compilation of our family history from 1610 to 1994. So I know I'm very spoiled. I've grown to appreciate it over the last couple of years working in the genealogy field, but it's all in German. So what I'm working on right now is translating the book for the rest of my family, as I'm the only one who speaks German. However, I know most people do not have a big green book, so what do? The main trick in genealogy is to start with what you know and go from there. This is, if you ask any genealogist, this is the trick. So what you do is start with yourself, So I know me. I know my parents. Most of us very, very likely know our grandparents. And I'm researching my mother's line. My father's line is Russian. And I know my mother's grandparents. My mother obviously knows who her grandparents are. I think that's true for most of us. And then if we're lucky, we know our great-great-grandparents as well. If you still have a grandparent alive, or if you talked to grandparents when they were alive, they might have been able to tell you who their grandparents were. So who I have here is George Fritz Miller. I know he was the one who emigrated from Germany. And I can document all of these people, their birth dates, their marriage dates, and so on, and go from there. So when you have the names that you need, you do need to document everything that you can. There are many people with the same names. I'm sure there's many Fritz Millers, Johann Schmidts, so it's very important to make sure you're not wasting your time in doing somebody else's research for them. So where can I look? Home sources. This is the best place to start. Maybe people have letters, diaries, Bibles. A lot of people actually wrote notes in Bibles or wrote birthdays and death days in Bibles. And people. Talking to the oldest living relative right now is the best advice I can give you. When they're gone, that information is going to be lost. So sitting down with them and finding out everything they know is the best primary source you can have. Vital records and church records. So vital records are birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, and those can be found on FamilySearch.org. Are you all familiar with that site? It's a very common genealogy site. And Ancestry.com, also very common in the genealogy world. If you can't find them on the internet, on those two sites, you can look at the actual churches. If you knew that your ancestor was from this county, you can go to the churches there. Many churches kept records of baptisms, marriage, death, and you can find a lot of information in these church records. And then finally, for the vital records, you can look at state and county archives. So you'll be surprised at what is all online nowadays. You can find a great deal of information online, but if you do want to actually look in a physical place, churches for church records and state and county archives for vital records are good clues. Census records, these are wonderful gold mines of information. You can find these on Family Search, and they started being kept in 1790, and they were taken every 10 years from 1790 on. The latest census record you can access is 1940 because of privacy laws. So as the years pass, then we'll be able to look at the 1950 census and so on. But they go back all the way to 1790. You can find these on archives.com, familysearch.org, and I actually wrote a whole list of links where you can find census records on your handout. But there's so many links, I didn't want to put them all up here. Ethnic newspapers are a great source. When our German-speaking ancestors came over from Germany, they continued to speak German, most likely, and they often published newspapers in their own language. So if you go to Genealogy Bank, they have a wonderful collection of ethnic newspapers, and it could be that your ancestor was mentioned in the town. Perhaps it would quote Fritz Miller, who lives at Boland Place, and you could find out a location just from a mention in a newspaper. And then passenger lists. So if you find out the emigrant from Germany, the name of the person who left, you can look at passenger lists for the ships that came over. These are kind of hit or miss. Has anyone ever worked with passenger lists before? Great. Okay, so you know the Hamburg list are pretty good. If your ancestor left from Bremen, a lot of those records were lost. So Hamburg, you have better luck than the Bremen ones. But you can also look for the list at where they arrived in America as well. And on your handout, there's a list of websites that have passenger lists. If you don't like working on the internet, or if you're having no luck with these sites, there's a book series called the Germans to America series, and that's a collection of books with passenger lists throughout the ages. And then finally, photographs. This is a little a fun clue. If you have photos that have been passed down in your family for generations, turn them over or look on the bottom, and sometimes it will say the name of the photography studio where the photo was taken. So if you don't know the town where your ancestor came from, or if you're looking in America and don't know where they lived, the photography studio will often print their name on the actual picture. Okay, so most of you seem to be familiar with Family Search, but for those who aren't, if I wanted to look for my ancestor, I could go to Records. I'm going to set this down for 1 second. I'll try to talk loud. I would type in Fritz Miller. I know he lived in Missouri. So from St. Louis.
Katherine, do you want to stand the mic for a few minutes?
Sure.
Okay.
His spouse's name was Barbara. Thank you. And if I didn't know his birth year, based on the fact that he's my great-great-grandfather, I could say maybe between 1850 and 1880. And what I have here, the first one, is all my ancestor. It's not gonna work. It's all my ancestor. And I have actually checked these before and verified. So when you're doing your own research, it's important to check dates, people's names, to make sure, again, that you're not doing somebody else's work for them. So if we look at the census, you can see that it says Fritz Miller, so his name. It says his wife, Barbara, who was actually 5 years older than him, which is something that I didn't know. You can see his children. So the arrow at the bottom is my great-grandfather, who was the little boy in the photo before. And at the bottom, you can also see his immigration year, so that you don't see the headings here, but this was the immigration year. So that might have been something we didn't know before, and that can help us look for passenger lists. And this is actually interesting because in our big green book, it says that he emigrated in 1888. But here on a record, it says 1887. So that's a very good example of verifying your sources. You never know what's true, what's not true, and it's better to get 2 to 3 to 4 documentations stating that something is true. Okay, and then here is another record I found on Family Search. And this I typed in George Fritz Miller instead of just Fritz Miller. Is anyone familiar with the German Rufname? So what that, some of you are. So what that means is a lot of Germans had 2 names, and they went by their second name. So they would maybe name all of their sons Johann and all of their daughters Mary. Yes?
I have 2 guys, one born in 1854, one in 1865.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob Frederick Juror is his name, they call him Fred.
Mm-hmm.
His brother was Johann Conrad Juror, they call him John.
Mm-hmm. So there are actual Johanns, yeah. So there are people who were named Johann, and they really did call them Johann too. That is true. That's a good point. But there were many Johanns that went by their second name. So if you look at a record, sometimes the name that they actually called them will be underlined. And it's not like us where my name is Katherine Ann, and I would always write Katherine on formal records. They would sometimes use their second name on formal records. So it's important to be aware of that. So in Family Search, I put in George Fritz Miller, and I got different records than when I put in Fritz Miller. And what came up was a death record for Fritz. And in this death record, I now have his parents' name, which is something I didn't know before. I now have a generation higher. I have a birth date. If you notice in the record before, it said his birth date was 1866. Now we have 1865. So another example of really checking your sources. And I have a location of where he lived in Germany. So this is a great find, actually. It tells us a lot of information that we didn't know before, but I can't say it enough. It's important to double check and not just take everything for granted. So if I double check, I go to this site. Has anyone heard of Find a Grave? It's a great site. I would type in his information here. And so I can hold the microphone. I won't do it, but I'll show you what I got. This is what came up. So this is his actual grave. You can see it says his birth year is 1865. So I think this is a better source than just another record on FamilySearch.org. This is an actual gravestone, which is likely accurate. It says his children there and there, his wife, and it actually has the plot where he is buried. So I can actually go there and check it out if I would like. I think it's on your sheet, but if it's not, it's findagrave.com. I'm sorry if I forgot to put it on the sheet, but findagrave.com. Yeah, it is, definitely, yes. But yeah, this is actually it's a little bit of a morbid fun. It's kind of fun to play around and see what graves you can find, and then you feel a little guilty about it afterwards. So like I said, photographs are a wonderful, wonderful clue, offer many clues. This is my great-great-great-grandmother, Adolphine. So this is Fritz's mom. And she married, she actually went to work for my great-great-great-grandfather after his third wife died, leaving him alone with 7 children. It's a little bit like The Sound of Music. And she was a nanny for them and a maid. It ended up that she got pregnant, and he was a pastor. He got kicked out of the church for having a child out of wedlock. So they then left the town, got married, and went on to have 6 children, Fritz, my great-grandfather, among them. So it's a little family drama. But on the back of the picture, you can see a name. So these pictures are pictures that we found at my grandmother's house. And you can see a name of a town here. Just a prime example of always examining all of your photographs. Yes, this is in Germany, yes. So even for American records, this would be something you could do, but this example is Germany. Right, yes, it's amazing, yeah. Okay, so we've done all of our research in America. We've documented everything. We've left no stone unturned. And I really can't reiterate that enough. Do as much as you can in America first. Document your ancestor, document their siblings, because going over to Germany is a lot harder. Yes? Yes, that's actually a very good example. Immigration records and naturalization records are also very good to look for. Thank you. So before we cross the pond, we need to know the name of the person who emigrated. So in my case, it was Fritz Miller. I'll talk about that in a minute. We need to know a date associated with him. So like I said, there were many Fritz Millers. There were many Johann Schmidts. So knowing a birth date, a marriage date, or a death date will help narrow down and make sure that we're really looking for the correct ancestor. And the most important thing we need to know is the place. So knowing the place where your ancestor came from is absolutely vital to finding your ancestor. And make sure that you know the town and the state. So just like we have Springfields in every state in America, there were many German towns that existed in multiple areas of Germany. So before you start looking in a church that's in the completely wrong state, make sure that you know the town and the state. So if you are having a little last name trouble and you don't know exactly what town your ancestor came from, I strongly advise to find out in whatever way you can, but as a last resort, this is a website. Has anyone heard of it before? Seen it before? It's called Geogen. You can type in a last name, and it will show you where people with that last name are living in Germany. So here you can see down in Bavaria are the most Schobers, which makes sense as my husband is from Austria, which is right here. You can look at this little map over here. It shows you. Okay? So this is just to get an idea, because Germans don't tend to move around as much as Americans do. So it might give you a clue that your ancestors were in this part of Germany. Yeah. Geogen, and this one is actually on your handout. geogen.stopel.net, and I believe that one's on there. But actually, I do have to ask, we probably should do questions at the end because we're filming, and they won't be able to hear you if you don't have a microphone. So keep your questions, keep track of them, and we'll get them at the end. But with your last name question, this is actually a good segue. Over here, it shows you different variations of how the name could have been spelled. I'm sure if most of you are doing genealogy, you've confronted different versions of a last name. So this is great. This shows you many different ideas for how the last name could have been spelled over here. And then, has anyone ever worked with Myers Gazetteer before? Okay, yeah, Stephanie's got it. This is a great source. If you don't know much about the place, so if you know your ancestor came from Erkrath, which is where we saw Fritz was from, but you don't know really how to go about contacting people, which if they had churches, if they had registration offices, you can type it in here. And Myers Gazetteer is actually a book. It was published in 1912, and it has all the cities for pre-World War I Germany. So for those of you with ancestors in now Poland or present-day France, this will still have your city. It's 210,000 different villages, towns, hamlets, things like that. And this is the online version, but there is an actual book. And it tells you where it's located, what kind of community it is, how many churches there are, if there's a registration office. It's just a great wealth of information. So the website is on your handout, or if you're interested in the book, that's also available. Okay, so back to your question. There are many spelling variations that can affect how your last name was spelled. Germans didn't have standardized spelling until much later. And they would often just write down their last name, how it sounded to them. So, do we have any linguists in here? If we don't, everyone say a B right now, B. Now say a P. Your mouth, you'll notice that your mouth is in the exact same position, right? B, P. The difference is that your vocal cords vibrate when saying the B. And these are all letters where your mouth is in the same position, but your vocal cords either vibrate or don't vibrate. And for us English speakers, these letters are very different. If we say a K or a G, those are two different sounds to us. But for German speakers, they really don't differentiate between these sounds as much as we do. I have a lot of friends in Austria who would often talk about the show King of Queens, and they would mention duck and carry. And I would always picture, and they would say, duck drives a UPS truck. And I would always picture a little yellow animal driving the UPS truck until I realized, no, they mean Doug. Okay? So that was a very common, not a mistake, but a variation for German people writing down their last names. So if you can't find your last name and it has one of these letters in it, try substituting the other letter. The same was true with vowel changes. For example, the name Meyer could have been spelled E-Y, A-Y, E-I, just depending how the person writing it down pictured it in his head. There really was no set way. So don't get angry, just accept that's how they worked. That's how it was. Finally, if any of you have an A-E, an O-E, or a U-E in your name, like me with Miller, that often meant that there was an umlaut, so the two little dots above your name. And this actually makes a big difference when you're searching in family search. If you type in the UE or the U umlaut, different records come up. So does anyone have E's in their name? Good. Okay, so try doing it with the umlaut on family search or on Ancestry and see what you get. And if you don't know how to type an umlaut on your computer, come up and talk to me afterwards. I can let you know. Finally, the IN. This is a way to signify a female. So if you see your last name with an IN on the end, it doesn't mean that it was a different last name. It means that it was a female person with that last name. So this has died out in Germany today in the last names, but it's still used for those of you who speak German. It's still used in the nouns. So for example, a teacher in Germany is a Lehrer, but a female teacher is a Lehrerin. A friend in Germany is Freund, but a female friend is Freundin. So back in the past, they did this with last names as well. And then finally, this relates to your question as well. Names tended to change over time, to develop. So I had some ancestors who I think back in the 1600s invented the plow with 2 plowshares. Don't ask me what that is, I don't know. But it was a plow with 2 plowshares. And plowshare in German was Scharen, and 2 was Tven. So their last name became Tven Scharen. They were Johann 2 plowshare. But eventually, Tven Scharen changed to Tven Schar, which changed to Twinschar, which eventually went through all of those changes until it became Zwinscher, what it is today. So you wouldn't think that Tven Scharen and Zwinscher are the same name. But if you see how it slowly developed throughout history, you can recognize it. So really, I mentioned this just to be aware of how your last name could have changed. Okay, so now we know that the spelling of our name could have changed. We know all our documentation from America. How do we really start researching in Germany? Church records. Church records are amazing. They have an amazing wealth of information in them. They were required in the mid-1500s. And you can find them, as I said, on Family Search, on Ancestry, and Archeon. Has anyone ever heard of Archeon before? This is a brand new site for those of you with Protestant ancestors, unfortunately only Protestant. Archeon has just started digitizing 200,000 church records. It's Archeon, it's ARCHION.de. It does have an English-speaking version, and not all German states are participating, but there are a great majority of them have, and they're working on convincing the other ones to start participating. So definitely worth checking out if you have Protestant ancestors. The records are in German, but the site you can change to English. Yeah. And what can you find in church records? Why are they so valuable? You can find names and occupations, dates of birth, marriage, and death, the maiden name of your ancestor. Sometimes you can even find the names and occupation of the parents, where your ancestor lived. And in death books, you can sometimes find how they died. So really, have you all worked with church records before? Yeah, they're amazing, amazing records for genealogists. So this is an example of one. This is a baptismal record. Here you can see we have the baptismal name of the child, the parents, the place of birth, time of birth, place and date of baptism, the priest or the pastor who performed the baptism, and the witnesses. And witnesses are actually very important. I'll talk about why later, but they're very, very important to note because they may help you find your own ancestor in other sources. And then here we have a family register. Sometimes church books will reference a family register, which is a separate book all about your family. So these were more common in southern Germany, but it's definitely worth asking if you're talking to the church directly, if they have a family register. It's also worth asking if the town has an Ortssippenbuch, and that's a fancy German word for a town heritage book. So this town heritage book contains the lineage of families in that town. And that link is on the back of your handout under additional links. So there's a big collection of Ortssippenbücher online. Yeah, I mean, there were definitely, she said she's amazed that they've lasted after the Second World War. There were definitely records lost, but you'd be surprised that a lot of records have remained, and some churches actually made copies of records after they were destroyed in other wars to make sure it didn't happen again. Yeah. They're called Orts, so that one? Oh, that's town heritage books or town lineage books. That's actually a different blog post. It's all the way down at the bottom. I believe it's the second to last entry. I think, if I'm correct, yes. And then finally, finding vital records in Germany. So when you're doing German research, if you go back before 1876, church books are the way to go. However, after 1876 is when vital records, so records kept by the government, start to kick in. You'd be surprised. The Germans didn't keep these kind of records until after unification, which was, any ideas? Very good. And that's when you'll start to find these kind of records. So here we have a marriage certificate from 1888 from Berlin. So this is what I do a lot of translations of these types of certificates. You'll see these a lot. However, if you are lucky and have ancestors from a French territory, a territory that was conquered by the French, like I said before, Napoleon brought with him the French record keeping system. So sometimes you will find records from as far back as the 1790s. And then you can find these records, if you haven't found them online, by looking at the Standesamt, the civil registration office of the town. They're the people who are keeping these records. However, German privacy laws are very, very strict with these records. A lot of times you can only get them from the Standesamt if you're a direct descendant. And there's a privacy time period on that too. So these are harder to get. Again, familysearch.org. And then, so now you have everything you can find for your ancestors. You have the church records, you have the vital records, maybe naturalization records. You've done everything you can, but you're stuck. What do? You can't find anything else about your ancestor. Then we look for their fan club. Fan club means looking for their friends, associates, neighbors, and I've added siblings. This means, like I said before, looking at the witnesses on one record and then starting to research those witnesses, because those witnesses might have referenced your ancestor and had more information about them than you found on your own. You can look at who your ancestor sold land to, who sold land to your ancestor, who was a confirmation sponsor, who was a witness at a marriage. So really expanding your search as much as possible, especially with siblings. Siblings are wonderful, wonderful clues. Looking at your ancestors' children's obituaries will sometimes list information about their parents, maybe more than was found on your direct ancestors line. So really expanding your search into the fan club. Okay, so now you've found the record. Is the microphone, you guys hearing me okay? Okay. Found the record, but one, it's in German. Two, it's in this crazy handwriting that nobody can read. What this handwriting is called Kurrentschrift, which means running script. And you might ask, why did the Germans have to write like this? Why couldn't they just use the letters we use? That's another story, but a whole nother presentation about that. But long story short is the Prussians began to use this script in their schools in 1714. And because Prussia was so powerful at the time, this became the common script for most of Germany. It became the script until 1940s, 1950s, when Hitler decided he wanted the people in his conquered territories to be able to read German writing, which is what people say. I'm not sure if that's rumor or fact. But in any case, after the Germans lost World War II and they were occupied by the Americans, British, French, and Russians, this script just kind of went away and they began using the Latin script, which is what we use today. So, if you ever need any help with translating your handwritten documents, I would love to help you. I believe you all have my card and you can always write me, but sometimes it's fun to try it on your own. And to do that, I have a couple little tricks for you. You all have the key on the back of there's two handouts, one of which has the key, I think. Okay. Okay, there's a second handout. Okay, so while we're passing those out, This letter is a letter that's pretty easy to identify based on the loop above the line and below the line. Looking at your key, any guesses what it is? Yeah, shout it out. Oh, H. It's an H. Very good. So the H is very easy to identify with these two loops. You can see it here in the German word Tochter. We have the loop above the line and below the line. Does anybody know what Tochter means in German? Daughter. Very good. So see this H? Everyone able to see it? Loop below, loop above, and loop below. Two more letters that are relatively easy to identify based on this little loop. Any guesses what that is? It's a vowel. U. Very good. It's a U. So the U is identifiable by this swoop. Anytime you see a swoop like this, it's a U. Okay? And the swoop will always be either directly above or slightly to the right. If it's to the left, you're looking at a different letter. Okay? We look at the swoop. This looks like our cursive letter. This is an I, exactly. So I is very easy. It just looks exactly like our cursive I. So here we have the word gut. What does gut mean in German? Good, exactly. And we have our little swoop. Now you might be getting angry and say, hey, this looks different from that swoop above. This is upside down. Well, just like I write different from you and you write different from you, everyone's handwriting was different. So the swoop might look slightly different, but it is still a swoop. It is something rounded above the letter. That is a U, okay? Anytime you see the swoop, you got a U. Sure. So this is a G. It kind of looks like our G, right? A little bit, maybe. This is the U with our swoop. And this is a T. Okay? Everyone with me? Not too angry yet? And finally, another good trick for deciphering the letters is this straight line right here. Anytime you see a straight line above the letter beneath it is going to be an N or an M. And that means, the straight line means that you should double that letter. So this word is D-E-N, and then we have the line, which means we should put two N's. So D-E-N-N, which is den, which means because in German. Okay? So there's some little clues. Look for your swoops, look for your straight lines, look for your loops, and those will help you identify at least some of the letters. Here we have a letter from 1924, I believe. It's a little tiny, but you can possibly see all these H's that I've underlined in red, the swoops above and below the line. And here, see how well you guys know it. Stop me, shout out when I get to the H. Very good. So we got our swoop above and below the line. Now stop me when I get to the U. Good. So we got our loop. So you guys are good already. You can read it already. Very good. H and U. It'll get you far. Differentiating between letters that are very, very similar. So some letters in German script are so similar, they make you want to just tear your hair out. I'm sorry. These two letters, any guesses what they could be? I heard an N, correct? And an E, very good, an N and an E. Yes, it is an E. So this, as you can see, they look very similar. The difference is that the N, which is here, it's more open, exactly. It's more jagged, so you can see the jaggedness of it. It's written with one single stroke. So we started here, didn't lift up our pen, and went to the end. And it's very spread out. The N is spread out. In contrast to the E over here, which is really squished together. And it's written with two strokes. We made this line, and then we made this second part of it. So when you see, I know it's very, very minuscule difference, but really the best clue is the N will be spread out and jagged, and the E will be squished together. So here we have a word, one of which is an E and one of which is an N, underlined in red. Any guesses which one's first? Very good. So see, it's not as hard as you think. And this one is the Right, you can see the big difference. This is very spread out, and this is very much squished together. This word, by the way, is eins, which means one, exactly. So E-I-N, this crazy looking S, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the letter S is my favorite letter in German genealogy. Why? Because it's very, very recognizable. It is. It doesn't look like other letters, we'll say that. However, it doesn't look like itself. There's 3 different ways to write the letter S. So that makes it a little bit more complicated. This way to write the letter S is used for lowercase words or the first syllable. So for example, the word schreiben in German, which means to write, would be written with this letter S. It's a lowercase s, and it's used in the word schreiben. This letter S is our end S. It's the S used at the end of a word or syllable. So this, I know it looks a little crazy, but it's actually very recognizable. You get these little loop, and it's used, for example, in the word bus, the word bus. It's the last letter, and we would use that end S. And then finally, this is our capital S. It kind of looks like an upside-down fish, you could say. And all German nouns, so all German persons, places, and things are written with capital letters. So whenever you see a German noun starting with an S, it will always have this S. So here, we have 3 versions of S's. Here is our capital S, right? That upside down fish. I'm getting a couple frustrated faces, but that's what it is. It's an upside down fish S. This is the word Straße, meaning street. Here we have, you see that straight S right there? It looks like that. The first letter of a syllable, Grundstück, which means land. And then here we have our end S in the word alles, meaning all. Okay, so 3 different versions of S, to be aware. And then finally, this is my ancestor, Julius Otto. I just loved his facial hair, so I thought I'd share his picture with you all. Just like we use abbreviations in text messages or emails, so TTYL, talk to you later, laugh out loud, our German ancestors used many abbreviations when writing letters, church books, and so on. One of the most common ones is U. For those of you German speakers, any guesses what U could mean as an abbreviation? Exactly, und. So you'll see just a U by itself a lot. And that means und, which means and. Okay? So that's very easy. You just look for your swoop. V is a little bit harder. Any ideas? Yes, exactly, von, which means from or of. So if you see a V by itself, it's von, which is from or of. D, this is a hard one. D usually comes directly before a date. It means den or the. So you might see at the top of a letter or the top of a certificate, D period 12 February. And that would mean the 12th of February. So really that D isn't very important, but just so you know, if it comes before a date, it just means the 12th of February. GEB is a very, very important one in German genealogy. Any ideas? Exactly, geboren. Geboren. So geboren technically means born. However, it can also mean nay. So whenever you see GEB before a last name, it means that it was that woman's maiden name. It's a very good abbreviation to know. EV, this is a religion, means evangelisch, which is Protestant. Catholic is abbreviated KATH. Okay? And then finally, you'll also get some Latin abbreviations. Do we have any Latin speakers in here? Yeah, me neither, really. But Latin, DD means de dato, which is on this date. You'll find a lot of Latin in the church records. A good website I wrote on your sheet, I think under the step abbreviations, is Abkürzung. Abkürzung means abbreviation in German, .de or com. And you can type in the German letters. It's on your first handout. You can type in the German letters and see what that abbreviation could mean in German. I also wrote a blog post about it at the 19 most common German abbreviations, so that might help you as well. Okay, understanding occupations. Just like our occupations are important for us today, when we meet someone, we say, "What do you do?" It was the same for our ancestors. So when we're looking at certificates, these are both marriage certificates, I believe, we can find our German relative's name. So this is Gottlob. And right before his name will usually be his occupation before the name. So when you're deciphering handwriting, even for me, it's very helpful to know what you're looking for. Could this be an occupation? Could this be a name? Could this be a number? And knowing that the occupation comes right before the name helps you to decipher the occupation. This is Zimmermann, which means, anybody know? Close. It's close. It's more building the house, a carpenter. Zimmermann, yeah. But you're all on the right track. And then here we have Johannes. We look right before his name for the occupation, and it's a Landfuhrmann, which is not a common occupation in Germany today. It's actually a transporter of goods with a wagon. Not very common. But yeah, it's a very good tip to have. Look for the name. You'll usually find the occupation before it. This one? An L. A trick that I like to use, I did this especially when I was first starting out, was playing hangman. Hangman, we all enjoyed it, right, when we were children. And it's a great little game to help us with our genealogy record. So for example, here, I recognized the letters S-C-H-E-I-N, shine, that's the word for certificate. I also recognized the letters T and S, but I didn't recognize the 5 letters before it. So what I did was write 5 little blinks for those letters. And slowly but surely, I recognized that U swoop, so I wrote in a U. Maybe I recognized that squishy little E, so I wrote in an E. And I filled in the letters B and R once I recognized them. But that first letter, no idea what it can be. However, when I look at my hangman word, I have Abortschein. Any guesses what that could be from you German speakers? Yeah, exactly. Birth certificate, Geburtsschein. Geburtsschein is the word for birth certificate. However, if you don't speak German, no worries. There's this great website where you can either type the first few letters of the words. So this says words beginning with. So if you only recognize the first 2 letters or the first 3 letters, you can type them in. Or if you only have the last few letters of the word, you can type them in. So let's say I only recognize shine, S-C-H-E-I-N. I then click search, Suche, and I get 63 possible words that could end with shine. Yeah, sometimes it's better if you recognize more letters, you get fewer results. But you can then look at these words, look at your certificate, and see, are there any letters that might match up with these examples? Okay, this website is also on your sheet and is I use this probably for every translation I do because there's always that one word that you're like, what could this be? Oops. Okay, almost there. Finally, if you want to give it a little go yourself, there's a great website where you can practice, so you can kind of see what words look like. And let's see, what's your name? Kim. Okay, so we can type in K-I-M and get Kim's name in Kurrentschrift. So that's how your name would have been written back in the day. But if, for example, this is helpful if you think you recognize a word, but you're not exactly sure how it would have been written, you can type in, let's say, Geburt, birth, not Kim's Geburt, and see, hey, does this word match up with what's on my sheet, what's on my document? I would say to take this with a grain of salt because, as I said before, everyone's handwriting is different. This is a good starting point, but your ancestor might have had very different handwriting, very unique handwriting. So just use this as a kind of a basis to get an idea. That's all I have for you. Does anyone have any questions for me? And before I start answering them, I would like to preface with my main work is in genealogy translation. So I will do my best to answer your questions on the genealogy research side of things. But if I cannot answer them, I can definitely write them down, get back to you, because I have many friends who are actually genealogical researchers. So go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. We need the microphone. Keep forgetting.
But we want it to be recorded.
My mom would say that her grandmother spoke High German or read High German. I don't know how. So could you explain a little bit what they meant by that?
Exactly. So High German is Standard German. So that's just like we have Standard American English is the English we all speak. High German is just the word for Standard German. There are many dialects in Germany and in Austria. When I moved to Austria, it was basically like learning a whole nother language because they speak a very strong dialect of German. So High German is called Hochdeutsch, and it's standard regular German. Yes. Yes. So in Hanover, they speak the most pristine, very clear High German. Good point. So there's definitely regions that speak more High German than others. You look confused. Did I answer your question correctly?
I figured that it meant more of a precise German
It should,
than
yeah.
a dialect, like we would, listen to somebody that spoke from the South and say,
Exactly.
what are they saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's just a standard German. Yes.
Going to a small town where my grandfather came from, the church said, well, we don't keep these records anymore. They go to other states. Do any of the websites that you've cited track that kind of thing?
I believe that the Myers Gazetteer should do that. If we look on there, it says where the records are kept or the different levels of records. It would be worth looking into if they do. I would also think asking the church itself, if they're the ones who told you, say, where did these records go? Did they not know?
The person that happened to be there didn't know.
Okay. The Myers Gazetteer would be my best bet for at least trying that. Does anyone else have any suggestions on that? Okay, I would check that. If you can't find anyone at the actual church, that would be my first bet to talk to the person.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, wait, one microphone.
Give you the mic.
Do I know anything about the Danube-Schwabians? I haven't actually worked with them. I don't know much about them. Did you have I have a friend who comes from them, but I haven't done much research on them.
Yeah, my father's side, they were ethnic Germans, but they were paid to farm land, which is now part of
It's Hungary?
Hungary,
Yes,
or Yugoslavia. Yeah.
Right. I actually haven't done any translations relating
Okay.
to that group. But I do know. I mean, have you done a lot of research on them before?
A little bit.
I know there are definitely groups for the specific ethnic Germans. So if you even just type them into Google, you can find a lot of forums that will help you find sites and things like that.
Get these questions on the recording.
Is there any old German script that you can't read, that you have a hard time translating?
My hardest, I'm currently translating little clips of church records from the 1600s. And the 1600 script is a lot more difficult than the 1800 script. I can do it, but for example, maybe a paragraph would take me twice as long as a paragraph for the 1800s.
The reason I ask is I heard a genealogist last year up in Greifswald, in Anklam area, and he had a hard time reading some of the old German script.
Yeah, I mean, it's the 1800s, 1700s is usually no problem. When we get back to the 1600s, they get very, very loopy, and it doesn't look as similar to this. But like I said, it's really just a matter of training your brain. I can do it. It just takes a little bit longer. Yeah.
When did the German language become standardized so that you would be looking for the same spelling or the same words for?
That's a very good question. I believe, and I'm not going to say I know this 100%, but I don't think it was until after the 1870s. And that does anyone know that for sure? It was 1870s, 1900s, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. But I do know that the handwriting became standardized around that time. It might have been the language as well. And the German language is still going through many reforms, as you'll know. I think in 1996 it was. They just had a great big spelling reform where they changed a lot of the rules. If anyone's ever seen that B-looking character in German, the S-set is what it's called, the 1996 spelling reform changed a lot of words that were spelled with that word. So it's kind of an ongoing process, but I would say late 1800s, early 1900s. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, making Stephanie run around.
How about finding records from Switzerland and Austria? Do you have-
Austria is very much the same. I know their vital records, that, so their birth certificates, marriage, civil records, they didn't start doing that until later. I think 1930s. I'm not exactly sure on the decade, but much later than Germany. But other than that, church records, they have the same church record system. Switzerland, I would assume would be the same, but I actually haven't done much research on Switzerland. But they have the cantons. So they have the, I think, 26 or so different states. So I would look in the specific canton for Switzerland. One second.
What was the name in German of that double naming system?
Oh, it's a Rufname, so R-U-F. So Ruf means to call, and then Name is name, so R-U-F-N-A-M-E. And that just means that it was your called name. So, for example, if I'm Katherine Ann, maybe my Rufname was Ann, and I would go by Ann. Okay? And that's actually, my mom is one of 10 kids, a very Catholic family. She has 7 sisters, and 3 of them are named Mary, and none of them go by Mary. So it's not as out of date as we think it is. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, 1 second. We gotta wait for our mic. Getting a workout.
So if you were looking through church records in a specific town or city, you would have to go through each church's records in order to find your relatives.
No, you can actually, that's what FamilySearch.org, Ancestry.com, and multiple other sites have already done that work for us. They've digitized many of the church records, and you can actually just go to those websites and try to find them online. But if you can't, that's when you would want to contact the church in Germany and go through their records.
So are you more apt to find the records you're looking for if your relatives come from a larger city rather than a smaller town?
I don't know if you could say that. I don't think so, actually. Sometimes the smaller towns are even better because if you go there, you meet a town historian who knows everything about this little town, whereas in a larger city, it becomes kind of generalized. I wouldn't say one's necessarily better than the other. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I had good fortune. My ancestors come from Pomerania in the very north on the Baltic, and there's the Pomerisch Landesmuseum in Greifswald. And they have more records there. They have some records in the church archives there that are not in any other part of Germany. And many of them are not online. So I had the good fortune of actually visiting there, and that was the only place we could find some of those records that I...
Right, so I'm sure visiting,
Maybe other places like that in Germany, I'm not sure.
I'm sure there are. Thank you for the tip. And I'm sure, when you visit someone and you meet people face to face, they're often more likely to give you more information rather than just writing an email. So if you are lucky enough to go to Germany or Austria or Switzerland, really trying to set up those meetings with people can really be very beneficial. One tip, though, if you do go to Germany, and I'm sure that those of you who have been there know this, set things up in advance because the Germans like to take random days off in the middle of the week or random afternoons off, especially the archives. They might have a lunch break from 12 to 2, and if that's the only time you were planning on being there, you won't be able to get in. So find out their opening hours, their opening days before you plan for one day in that town. Yeah.
This is a genealogy question, so feel
I'll do
free
my
to
best, yes.
say no. Do you have any experience with either military records or university records?
I have translated military records. There are multiple websites online where you can find military records. I left them out of the presentation today for time's sake, but there are many. If you look at the back of one of the handouts on my additional links and resources, James Beidler has written a lot of books on German genealogy. The name of the book is on that paper. And he talks a lot about military records and gives a lot of ideas for where you can find them. You can get it on Amazon. I think that's, and even just typing it into Google, I actually found a lot about military records. And sorry, university records. I haven't, yeah, I would contact the university. I personally haven't translated any university records I've translated modern day university records, but not of the past. But even just contacting the university might give you a clue. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you guys all very much. You were a wonderful audience, and let me know if I can be of any help with translations.